Autumn in Washington, D.C. had always carried a quiet tension, the kind that clings to the wind and whispers between the branches. But in October 2002, that unease deepened into dread, the kind that crept into morning routines and made folks flinch at shadows. It started without warning. No demands, no manifesto, just cold, deliberate death. One life vanished near a gas station. Another disappeared outside a school. Then another, and another, and another still. 10 souls in total, lost to a ghost behind a scope, each taken with a single clinical shot. 3 others clung to life, caught in the storm but not claimed by it. They called him a phantom, a specter behind the glass, a predator who didn't speak, didn't show his face, didn't need to. All he left behind was brass, fear, and silence. The press called it the work of a lone gunman, but the FBI wasn't so sure. By the time the 3rd victim hit the ground, federal agents were already sliding into place. This wasn't just murder. This was psychological warfare, and the Bureau knew it. Special agents arrived like quiet thunder, 400 strong, blanketing the capital and surrounding suburbs with federal presence. Helicopters whispered overhead. Roadblocks rose like fortresses. Intelligence units began cross-checking ballistic data, while behavioral analysts crafted a profile that would become their gospel. To the Bureau, this wasn't random. It was a message written in blood. The shots were too clean, the timing too deliberate, and the killer or killers moved like ghosts, always vanishing before anyone could get a look. But the FBI didn't panic. They calculated, they adapted, and they built a war room from scratch, a joint operations center where local cops, federal agents, and tactical teams could trade intel faster than a bullet in flight. Meanwhile, the world outside descended into paranoia. Gas stations draped tarps over their awnings, shielding customers from line of sight. Parents clutched their children tighter. Men and women glanced over their shoulders every time they stepped outside. No one felt safe, because no one was. The phone lines at FBI headquarters crackled with tips, hundreds by the hour. Each one was logged, cross-checked, filtered through a matrix of possibility. A hotline had been opened. The Bureau wanted eyes everywhere and ears in every conversation. If someone saw something, anything, it could mean the difference between another name on the evening news or a break in the case. And then, the shooter struck again. Another life gone, just like that, like clockwork. But this time, the Bureau noticed a change, a subtle detail, a shift in signature, a hint of impatience. The ghost was growing restless, and the agents of the FBI, and when he did, they would be there to catch it. By the 2nd week, the nation was no longer watching. It was holding its breath. The killer's rhythm, once erratic, now felt like a grim metronome. One victim every few days. Always from a distance, always without a sound. They dropped in parking lots, on sidewalks, at bus stops, ordinary places transformed into final destinations. There were no demands, no pattern, just precision. But behind the curtain of terror, the Bureau was moving. Agents weren't sleeping. Forensic analysts combed through each scene with surgical patience, collecting casings, measuring angles, reconstructing trajectories like they were drawing constellations across a night sky of chaos. The Behavioral Analysis Unit, stationed deep within FBI headquarters, was drawing up psychological sketches of their prey. The profile was clear: methodical, intelligent, likely ex-military. Someone who needed control, who didn't just kill, but planned it down to the second. But even brilliance leaves fingerprints. Not on glass or steel, but in behavior, in choice, in habit. Then came the first real shift. A tarot card, found at one of the scenes. It sat face up near a school shooting, The death card. Scribbled on it, a message. I am God. That wasn't just a signature, that was ego, arrogance, and the FBI took note. Meanwhile, the Bureau's command post pulsed with data, surveillance feeds, witness statements, forensic reports. Patterns were emerging, however faint. Witnesses reported a box truck. Others mentioned a sedan. One tipster claimed to see flashes from a tree line. It wasn't much, but it was movement. And movement is all the Bureau needs. As the media frenzy thickened, the FBI made a call. Don't chase the killer. Lure him. They used the press, crafted messages, staged public appeals, not to the public, but to the shooter himself. The strategy was bold. Manipulate the ego they now believed was spiraling out of control. You think you're a ghost, one retired profiler had said, but ghosts don't leave messages. The trap was psychological, and it was closing. But then he changed again. He struck in Virginia, then in Maryland, back and forth across state lines like a deadly waltz. A boy was shot outside a school. This time the victim lived, but the message was louder than ever. No one is untouchable, not even the children. And the Bureau, they didn't flinch, they doubled down. License plate readers, satellite surveillance, ballistic mapping software. The FBI brought everything they had. They weren't chasing shadows anymore, they were chasing a signature, a pattern, a mind. And somewhere in that maze was their man. With each passing day, the illusion of the lone phantom began to unravel. A call came in, not from a witness, not from a bystander, but from someone claiming to speak for the killer. The voice was calm, measured, almost smug. He demanded attention, respect, money. He called himself the shooter. But the Bureau wasn't listening to the tone. They were listening to the details. We want $10 million, the voice said. We'll tell you how to stop the killings. That wasn't desperation. It was negotiation. And the FBI knew killers like this don't bargain unless something's changed. Either they were losing control or they were making a move. Agents in the behavioral analysis unit leaned in. One analyst noticed something in the phrasing, something off-kilter. A linguistic pattern that hinted at foreign influence. Caribbean, maybe. Jamaican patois. The Bureau cross-referenced the call with phone tower data. It pinged from a payphone in the outskirts of Maryland. Surveillance teams swarmed, but the trail was already cold. Still, it was a crack. And cracks, if followed patiently, can open into pathways. Then came the breakthrough. A man had been shot at a rest stop near Ashland, Virginia. But this time the shooter made a mistake. He left a shell casing, a real one, untouched, unwiped. And inside that casing, a fingerprint. The lab ran it again, and then a hit. Lee Boyd Malvo, 17 years old, a runaway. No prior convictions, but a face in the system from immigration files. Malvo wasn't alone. He was connected to a man, a veteran, someone who'd lived off the grid for years. John Allen Mohammed. The moment that name hit the Bureau's database, everything changed. John Mohammed, former Army marksman, expert in stealth, surveillance, long-range shooting, recently divorced, known to travel with a teenage boy who wasn't his son, but followed him like one. Suddenly, the myth had a name and a face. The Bureau didn't celebrate. They recalculated. Now it wasn't a hunt for a shadow, it was a manhunt, and the FBI knew if Mohammed and Malvo realized they'd been exposed, they'd vanish again. Or worse, escalate. So the Bureau worked in silence. Agents reached out to motels, gun shops, gas stations. They used every trick in their toolkit: financial tracing, facial recognition, vehicle databases. They even analyzed past 911 calls from other states, looking for Mohammed's signature across time. And then, one call changed everything. A man from Montgomery, Alabama, claimed his liquor store had been robbed earlier that year. A shooting. A boy. A man. Once the FBI had the make and model, the game shifted. Agents distributed alerts to thousands of officers across the eastern seaboard. The car wasn't rare, but the configuration was, and the killer's habit of sleeping in rest areas gave the Bureau an idea. Cast a net. Tighten the radius. Watch the quiet places. October 24, 2002, just past midnight. An alert officer, scanning vehicles parked at a roadside rest stop off Interstate 70 in Frederick County, Maryland, spotted a suspicious car, a blue 1990 Chevrolet Caprice. Virginia plates. 2 men inside, motionless. He radioed it in. What happened next was textbook Bureau procedure. No sirens, no panic. A federal takedown in the shadows. Tactical teams rolled up in silence. Snipers positioned themselves like phantoms of their own. The Caprice was surrounded before the men inside even stirred. Then came the command. Move! SWAT teams moved like clockwork. Weapons drawn, lasers cutting through the dark. FBI, hands where we can see them. Inside the car, a young man blinked awake, confused. The older one silent. No resistance, no words. Just resignation. It was them, Mohammed and Malvo. The car was processed like a crime scene. In the trunk, investigators discovered what they had long feared. A customized firing hole, just wide enough for a rifle barrel. It was concealed by the license plate, giving the shooter a perfect line of sight, while remaining completely invisible to the world outside. This wasn't improvisation. This was architecture. Inside the vehicle, they found the murder weapon, a Bushmaster XM15 rifle, tucked away like a serpent coiled beneath the seats. Ballistics later confirmed what the Bureau already knew. This was the gun that ended 10 lives and shattered hundreds more. The FBI had them, but they didn't exhale, because justice in the Bureau's eyes isn't about catching a killer. It's about proving it, meticulously, relentlessly, without error. With Mohammed and Malvo in custody, the weight of national fear began to lift. But inside the Bureau, the atmosphere only grew heavier. Catching them was a victory. Convicting them? That would take the full force of federal precision. The interrogations began immediately. Malvo, just 17, was the first to speak. At first he was reserved, guarded, even passive. But over time the walls came down. He spoke of training, of mentorship, of indoctrination. John Mohammed, he said, had become more than a partner. He was a father figure, a commander, a manipulator. The FBI's psychological team took notice. They began building a profile not just of a killer, but of a boy weaponized by a man. Mohammed had molded Malvo. That list? It was real. Recovered from the vehicle and Malvo's notes, it detailed locations, potential victims, even entire cities. The scope of the plan had been far greater than anyone imagined. Washington was just the beginning. They had planned to kill 6 a day. The goal wasn't chaos. It was control through terror. And in the eyes of the FBI, that redefined the case. This wasn't random violence. It was domestic terrorism, an organized campaign of psychological warfare against the American public. Prosecutors, guided by the Bureau's mountain of evidence, began building airtight cases in both Virginia and Maryland. Each piece, every casing, every photograph, every surveillance timestamp, was cataloged and cross-referenced, nothing left to chance. Courtrooms filled with quiet dread as the story unfolded. The trunk sniper's nest, the careful selection of locations, the cold efficiency of the kills, Malvo's chilling drawings, Mohammed's silence. And through it all, the quiet, steady presence of the FBI. Agents testified, analysts explained trajectories, behavioral experts decoded intent. From the field teams to the forensic labs, the Bureau's role was clear. They hadn't just chased ghosts. They had turned shadows into facts. In the end, justice moved swiftly. John Allen Muhammad was sentenced to death in 2003, executed by lethal injection in 2009. Lee Boyd Malvo received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars, a boy-turned-killer, now a man with only memories and consequences. But for the Bureau, closure wasn't measured in verdicts. It came in quieter moments, when families could walk outside again, when children returned to playgrounds, when a city exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. Long after the headlines faded and the sirens quieted, the Beltway sniper case remained etched into the Bureau's memory, not as a triumph, but as a cautionary echo. It was a case that rewrote the Bureau's playbook. A new kind of terror had emerged, mobile, anonymous, and patient. A campaign not of ideology, but of control. And the agents who walked through it came out changed. The FBI didn't just catch killers. They mapped the contours of human fear, studied how it spreads, how it calcifies, how it turns cities into silence. The case gave rise to reforms in interagency coordination. It taught the value of rapid intelligence fusion, the need for centralized response teams, and the power of behavioral science when paired with real-time data. But beyond the protocols and procedures, the story left something deeper behind, something unspoken. It reminded the Bureau of the cost of waiting, the cost of missteps, the cost paid by 10 strangers who woke up on ordinary mornings, never knowing they'd. And yet, in the quiet corridors of Quantico, in classrooms where new agents still train beneath the gaze of old portraits, this case is not told as a story of loss. It is told as a warning. A reminder that evil doesn't always come in storms. Sometimes it arrives in silence, parked beneath a tree, waiting for the right angle. And when it does, the FBI will be there, watching, listening, learning, not to chase shadows, but to name them, to expose them, to end them. Because in the end, the Bureau doesn't just investigate crime. It hunts the darkness that makes crime possible. And this time, it won.